We're going to break down the latest from the front of the show with Nick Harris, who had some very noteworthy reports on the nickel corner spot in particular. Before we get into that, we are 26 subs away from 243,000 here on the Cowboys Report, and we should be able to get there on today's video, so hit that sub button right now. Let's begin with the latest on Minkah Fitzpatrick. Those trade rumors are back, and I do think whether it's a trade or a potential release of Minkah, the Cowboys are a team to monitor on this front. Nick Harris provided a noteworthy update over the weekend on a potential Minkah trade, reporting that the Cowboys were in the final stages of completing a trade for Miami Dolphins safety Minkah Fitzpatrick prior to the trade deadline, but that was abandoned when the deal for New York Jets defensive tackle Quinn Williams came through. Could that be revisited? We had spent plenty of time on the live show that day discussing potential Minkah Fitzpatrick trades, and I didn't know they were that close to landing him at the deadline last year. This is not the first time the Cowboys have been interested in Minkah Fitzpatrick. If you want to go back, there's a video on it too here on the Cowboys board if you really want to wind back the clock, as they were interested back in 2019. This has been a player the Cowboys have always liked, which, he's good at football, right? He fits very well as a nickel/safety option. Depending on what Christian Parker wants in that nickel corner role, I think Fitzpatrick fits that. He would also fit very well with your glaring need at safety. In fact, he actually played more in the slot last year than any other spot on defense. Now, he is as much like a guy we'll discuss coming out of Ohio State and Alabama by virtue. Minkah can do it all. He can do strong safety, he can do free, he can do nickel, he can do the box's essentially strong safety stuff, he can kind of line up at that overhang role. That's what the defensive line is. Did some out wide corner more in man coverage looks. He fits well and is still a very quality safety in the NFL. The numbers show 6 pass breakups and 1 interception for a team that wasn't that good defensively last year, with decent high coverage percentage allowed but very low volume, a lot of short area stuff which again happens more in the nickel. Your completion rate's normally higher, but your yards are normally pretty darn low. I don't presume you're going to get the 2022 version of Minkah Fitzpatrick probably ever again. But if you can get good coverage, good run support, and good everything that he still does at his still fairly young age, this is a player I would have a tremendous amount of interest in. But with a trade for him, that's a different conversation potentially. Why for yes and for no? Let me know in the comments section of today's show. Look, I think in an ideal world the Dolphins don't find a trade partner, and in general when those reports start to leak about them having trade talks, oftentimes that means they're not having the trade talks they want or trade talks period, that they're looking to generate more buzz and more interest there. So I know he's cut, Dow is signed into a new deal, keep your draft pick, right? But flipping let's say the 5th round pick for Minkah, it's far from a bad outcome, I don't see any downside to at least major downside. Let me clarify that because if he's bad, okay whatever, which I don't think he's going to be, but if you flip a day 3 pick, oh no, the problem is you don't have a lot of day 3 picks. You have your own 4th rounder which may be a touch expensive, a 5th round pick, a projected comp pick which you should be in line for, a projected 6th round comp pick, and a 7th rounder that should be via the Chiefs. You are light on draft capital outside of your early 1st rounders. Now also of note, Minkah turns 30 in November and he's got 1 year left on his deal, but this would stabilize at least one spot in your secondary, with if he's not the best, he's at least the 2nd best player on your secondary I think by a pretty comfortable margin. There's a huge tier gap for me right now. Your nickel options are Darren Bland, Jordan Lewis, maybe Israel Mukumu or others. Not that's kind of more of yeah maybe they could try it out there. I'm curious if they think Bland can do it because if they think Bland can do it, that opens up more possibilities for the offseason of you could add an outside guy or an inside guy. If they don't think he can do it, then that kind of limits you a little bit even with your potential round 1 pick potential. So I think adding Minkah would be okay you're safe at nickel and or safety, at least one of those spots gets filled. I would have a tremendous amount of interest here. Today's show is made possible by Prize Picks. Shoot your shot on Prize Picks and get $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. That's right, PrizePicks is now giving you $50 in lineups when you sign up and play your first $5. PrizePicks makes every dunk, dime, and board that much more exciting, so don't miss this chance on America's #1 app for sports picks. That is PrizePicks, and they now have early payouts. Your player gets off to a hot start, you have the option to cash out those winnings before the game even finishes. Not just basketball, they've got baseball's season-long PrizePicks currently available as well, like Brian Bello less than a 4.1 ERA, Garrett Crochet more than 225.5 strikeouts, Roman Anthony more than 21.5 homers, and then Nick Kurtz more than 3 multi-home run games. Get started on PrizePicks and join millions of users on America's #1 sports picks app. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. Link will be in the comments section and the description of today's show. That's prizepicks.com/CLNS and use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Let's move to Caleb Downs here. Nick Harris mentioning the Ohio State safety as a very logical nickel safety option. When you go back and look at what Christian Parker said about the nickel, that certainly screams Caleb Downs in part because I think he compares very favorably to who Minkah Fitzpatrick is as a player and as a prospect. Downs I think is the best possible pick for the Dallas Cowboys. He has done the box stuff, he has done the deep safety stuff, he's done the nickel stuff. I'm curious how he tests at the Combine, assuming he does test in the coming days here at the NFL Combine. I can't picture somebody who would be more impactful in this draft on the defensive side of the ball than Caleb Downs. I think he was a freshman starter at Alabama, which doesn't happen. You know, Nick Saban was yeah, he's the best safety since Minkah essentially for them. That's what he said as a first-month starter. When Saban has that level of praise, that should certainly be noteworthy. I think he is a dream pick at number 12, but will he fall to them? I have my doubts because all the stuff I just said is why a team in the top 12 should simply take him. You could try to trade up for him, you could try to jump to 6 or 4 or whatever if he slides to 8. It's also tricky to pull that off with the amount of needs that the Dallas Cowboys have and the lack of draft picks. Maybe you could do something funny where you take your 20 and 12, jump up and get a 2 back. You could try to get creative in that area. I don't know if that's something an opposing team would want to do, but if you could do it like that I feel better because then you're not losing out on the potential starter on the defensive side of the ball, or go spend big money in free agency, fill all of your needs and go well we can just go get the one impact piece we need now. But if you're multiple pieces away, it gets a bit tricky to justify the move up. So would you do it? Would you trade up for Caleb Downs? T for trade, P for pass. Let me know in the comments section of today's show. 3 free agent options mentioned by Nick Harris, several of whom we've discussed here in the past on the channel. Darren Bland, wait no. Actually DeAndre Alford, Roger McCreary, and Alontae Taylor, beginning with Taylor. If you want to go sign a nickel corner, this would be the logical name for me. You know you can go make the big blockbuster move for McDuffie in a trade whatever. But Taylor played nickel for the Saints especially this past year. I thought he had a better year, frankly moving more inside, still had been a little bit streaky over the course of his career, been inconsistent, but he played under Derek Ansley with the Volunteers so there's that connection. He was linked to the Eagles in a trade deadline deal, then they went out and got Michael Carter instead who didn't play very much, was there I think trying to see if Dijon could go play outside corner and plug someone else there in the nickel and they just went need to stay in the nickel because we don't have enough options there. Would be a good fit, but better size what the Cowboys historically have liked in the nickel corner spot. I think he's a quality run defender as well, but he might cost you $13, $14, $15, $12, $11 whatever it is $1 million. That would be a change of pace for the Cowboys and their spending ways. I've always liked Roger McCreary dating back to his days at Auburn. That was one of my favorite guys. He would be an outlier for this Cowboys organization though not because of his play style. I think he fits pretty well in that nickel corner spot, but mostly because he's got really short arms. That's always been an issue for teams. I thought he played pretty well for the most part, especially down the stretch for the Rams in a smaller role for them, but he would be a cheaper viable option. DeAndre Alford actually had a pretty solid season. The completion rates yards may be a little bit higher than you'd like, but bunch of pass breakups, bunch of interceptions. I don't think he'd be as expensive as Alontae Taylor, which again makes him a potential fit for the Cowboys, as we know how they truly spend money, but trades they're willing to maybe at a bigger contract in the end. Still on the right side of 30. Again, all those guys I think fit just different levels of overall impact. So who do you want to start? Could be a draft pick, could be a trade, could be a free agency, could be a guy on the roster. Who do you want lined up at the nickel corner spot? One other draft option mentioned by Nick, I think it's a good one, is Evandy Williams, who mostly played on the outside for Clemson. He was a predominant outside corner. I thought was a little bit better back in 2024, but compared to everybody else who really regressed for the Tigers this past year, the younger brother of A.J. Terrell didn't have the same level of drop-off. He's a willing tackler, misses a little bit, but he's got 8 forced fumbles over the past couple seasons. Like that jumps out to me, bunch of pass breakups. Again, I think there are some teams that are going to view him as a nickel which could fit for the Cowboys, but he's mostly played on the outside at Clemson.